The last sense is that of hearing and also equilibrium. So we're going to talk about hearing first, but first I need to introduce you to the anatomy of the ear. So the external or outer ear has two main parts. It has the auricle or the pinna, and this auricle is what I like to think of as like a satellite dish that funnels the sound waves into the auditory canal. And that auditory canal is also called the external acoustic meatus, and it's the second part of the external ear. Also, along the external acoustic meatus are ceruminous glands, which are specialized type of uh, sweat glands that produce earwax or cerumen. And the job of this is to transmit the sound waves to the tympanic membrane, which is the eardrum. So the tympanic membrane is really the end of the external ear, and it's the boundary between the external and the middle ear. So it transfers the sound energy to the bones of the middle ear. And the middle ear you can see here, and this also shows the internal ear, which we'll get to later. The middle ear is also called the tympanic cavity. And again, the beginning of it is the tympanic membrane. Those sound waves are then transmitted to the auditory ossicles, the smallest bones in the body. And they begin with the malleus, incus, and stapes. Hammer is not the word for it, it's just the description of it. So the name of it is malleus. This is shaped like an anvil, but again, the name of it is the incus. So malleus, incus, and stapes. Stapes is shaped like a stirrup. And kind of the end of the middle ear cavity, the tympanic cavity, is another membrane, which is deep to the stapes. And that membrane is called the oval window. So it's kind of like the tympanic membrane, but just much smaller. And it's the border between the middle ear and the inner ear, which we're going to talk about next. Now, one of the preventative mechanisms that's present in the middle ear is a couple of very small muscles called the tensor tympani and the stapedius. Both of these muscles will contract in response to loud sounds to prevent hearing damage. When we look at the internal ear, we can see several different structures. The three regions are the vestibule, the semicircular canals, and the cochlea. So this is what we call a membranous labyrinth. These regions are filled with fluid, which is similar to cerebral spinal fluid, and they're involved in transmitting along that auditory pathway. So we can see the semicircular canals shown here. They go in three different directions. The vestibule is here. The utricle and saccule are the receptors in them. And then finally, the cochlea, the very inside of it has receptors called the spiral organ. So the stapes in the oval window. This again is the border between the middle ear and the inner ear. So this area right here would be the middle ear. When we look at our next slide, this is specifically on those first two parts of the inner ear, the vestibule and the semicircular canals. The vestibule, they are within, again, this labyrinth structure, which kind of means like a maze, and they're egg-shaped. There's two of them, and one is called the saccule and one's called the utricle. The utricle is continuous with the semicircular canals, and the saccule is continuous with the cochlear duct. When we hear cochlea, we need to think hearing, and when we hear semicircular canals, we need to think balance or equilibrium. So these two sacs, the vestibule, are going to house equilibrium receptors, which are called maculae. And those maculae are going to respond to changes in position of the head. But there's fluid in there that is going to move based on the response of our head moving in a certain direction. The semicircular canals, there's three of them oriented in three planes of space. And within them are enlarged areas called the ampullae, and they house equilibrium receptors called the crista ampullaris. So again, what is really important for you to make sure that you know is that the receptor in the vestibules, the saccule and utricle, are called the maculae. The receptor in the semicircular canals is called the crista ampullaris. And it responds to a different type of movement of our head. It would be rotational movement, kind of like you would see with a ballerina turning and rotating, or perhaps on the show Dancing with the Stars. The third part of the inner ear is the hearing part, and it's the cochlea. So it's a small spiral. It almost looks like a conch shell. It extends from the vestibule, and within the cochlear duct, there is what's called the organ of Corti or spiral organ of Corti. You can refer to it either way. But what's important about it is it's where the hearing receptor is located at. So just like for the vestibule and the semicircular canals, we talked about the receptor for it. This is also the receptor for hearing, the spiral organ. So if we were to take this cochlea and cut it into a section, we would have three different chambers. Those three different chambers are the scala vestibule, media, and tympani, and each of them contain a type of fluid. There's what's called paralymph, endolymph. It sounds kind of like lymphatic fluid, but it resembles cerebral spinal fluid. And the most important part of this for you to know is the cochlear duct, because that's where the spiral organ of Corti is actually located. And from here, the cochlear branch of the vestibular cochlear nerve runs from the spiral organ to the brain. So the transmission that occurs in the cochlea is shown on this slide. The sound wave vibrates the tympanic membrane first. Those ossicles vibrate. Pressure waves created by the stapes pushes against the oval window, and fluid moves through the scala vestibuli. Sounds with frequencies are going to transmit eventually to the cochlear duct, which again is where the spiral organ of Corti is located at. So let's look at the auditory pathway to the brain as we have for the other senses throughout this chapter. That these pathways are, again, it's a somatosensory pathway where there's basically three steps. There's going to be step one, which begins at the receptor, and the receptor is going to be the spiral organ. It's then going to go to the cochlear nerve, towards the medulla, midbrain, and eventually it's going to be interpreted at the primary auditory cortex in the temporal lobe.